Welcome to this episode of Dr. Ambedkar Thoughts. In the trinity of liberty, equality, and fraternity, the principle of equality is the most argued, disputed, and controversial principle. In our video 4, we tried to understand Dr. Ambedkar's radical thoughts on equality, which is all about substantial equality. In this video, we will try to break down the myth that the policy of reservation is inconsistent with the principle of equality. Many people, especially those coming from general category, believe that the constitutional provision of reservation is against the principle of equality, that it discriminates on the basis of caste, hence it should be removed and constitution should be amended accordingly. It is surprising to note that till 1976, the Honourable Supreme Court itself in many judgments held that the provision of reservation under Article 15(4), which relates to reservation in education, is an exception to the rule of equality under Article 15(1). It is quite a learning to know how understanding of Supreme Court evolved through its illuminating interpretations in the landmark judgments by transforming equality with substantive equality through reservation. To begin with, let us try to understand the principle of equality as enshrined in Constitution. Article 14 and 18 are related to principle of equality. In the Constitution, Article 15(4) and 16(4) provide for reservation in the field of education and employment respectively. There are two parts of Article 14. Equality before law. It means that law does not discriminate on the basis of birth, position, gender, and other personal attributes. Thus, privileged, underprivileged, and unprivileged are all equal before law. Equal protection of law. It means that law provides equal treatment to all those who are in similar circumstances or situations. Both equality before law and equal protection of law aim to establish equality of status and opportunity, as embodied in the preamble of the Constitution. If men and women are equal, then why does the Constitution prescribe special laws, special provisions for women? We do not take this as discrimination because there is a difference in their circumstances. CEDAW, that is Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, also known as International Bill of Women's Human Rights. CEDAW departed from gender-neutral language and took clear stand on gender-neutral laws. Indirect discrimination comes from gender-neutral laws, which seems to give equal opportunity to access because of patriarchal system. For example, there is a government scheme to promote fruit farming, which is gender-neutral. Government will give all the assistance provided you own a farm, but this is indirectly discriminatory to women because traditionally women do not own land, hence they cannot have farm, so they cannot apply for this scheme. So it is obligation of the government to put inheritance laws in place and make them de facto and not de jure. If the rules for the workplace are framed equally for men and women, this would amount to furthering discrimination. For certain biological and historical discrimination, there is a difference between their social and economic circumstances. To impart true equality to women, the state needs to make special provisions and provide concession to women. Let me give another example. For both the poor uneducated rural Dalit farm laborer and educated urban upper caste person, the doors of courts are equally open and available on paper. However, in reality, it is not so. For an uneducated poor Dalit, leave aside High Court and Supreme Court, there are many obstacles in his access to even the district courts. Here the word access is very important. For a large section of the population in India, till the state makes special provisions and does not remove the obstacles in their way, it cannot be assumed that the doors of justice are equally open to both of them. This is why NALSA, National Legal Service Authority, came into existence to provide legal aid and free assistance. Many people may not be aware that the very first amendment to the Constitution of India was on account of issue of equality and reservation. Through this amendment, Article 15(4) was inserted in the Constitution in 1951. The question arises, when the Constitution already had a provision in the form of Article 16(4) which relates to reservation in employment, then why there was no existence of Article 15(4) relating to reservation in education? This amendment was put before Constituent Assembly. Rejecting the amendment, Dr. Ambedkar said that if these words were added, it will probably give a handle for a state to say, well, we are making special provisions for the scheduled caste by establishing separate schools for scheduled caste in the villages when there is a general school in the village open to all children of all the communities. To avoid such situation, such a clause was not included in the original draft constitution. The constitution was promulgated in 1950, and within a year of the commencement of the constitution, Champakam Dorairajan filed a writ petition in the Madras High Court on the issue of the provision relating to reservation is inconsistent with the fundamental rights to equality as enshrined in the Constitution. Let us go into the history of the case. The state of Madras in the year of 1921 issued an order appointed seats in the medical and engineering colleges which provided that for every 14 seats the selection committee was to admit the following. Prior to the communal geo, out of these 14 seats, almost 12 to 13 seats were being appropriated by the single Brahmin caste, leaving 1 or 2 seats to the entire non-Brahmin community. A corrective measure was invented in the said geo in order to provide equal opportunity to all communities. This geo was not faltered by anyone until the constitution came into force. Champakam Dorairajan filed a writ petition in the Madras High Court challenging the communal geo. It was challenged on the ground of discrimination on the basis of caste in the matter of admission to educational institutions, which is violative of Article 15(1) and Article 29(2). A full bench of Madras High Court struck down the geo as unconstitutional. Consequently, the state of Madras approached the Supreme Court evoking Article 46. A constitutional bench of the Supreme Court on April 9, 1951 also struck down the appeal. South India did not give up and agitated for rectification of the injustice and put pressure on the government of India. Consequently, Government of India brought in the very first amendment to the Constitution in 1951 in the form of Article 15(4). In his work Quest for Equality, Boja Tharakam raises pointed questions. According to him, when the Constitution already has Article 16(4), which empowers the state to frame special provisions for socially and educationally backward classes in the matters of employment, why then the Supreme Court did not find this discriminatory while it treated the Madras geo with similar provision as discriminatory? The judgment of the Honourable Supreme Court in the Dorairajan case, it could not link the aim of equality of status and opportunity as enshrined in the preamble with social justice also enshrined in the preamble. Granville Austin, the author of the famous book, who wrote that the Constitution is first and foremost a social document. The majority of India's constitutional provisions are either directly arrived at furthering the aim of social revolution or attempt to foster this revolution by establishing conditions necessary for its achievement. Commenting on the Champakam case, Granville Austin states that it is undercutting another social revolutionary policy and that the decision struck at the essential dimension of the revolutionary policy. It is not just the general masses who perceive that reservation is inconsistent with the principle of equality. This indeed was the initial impression of the Supreme Court also until 1976. It termed Article 15(4) and 16(4) as exceptions to the rule, that is Article 15(1). The landmark judgment in the case of State of Kerala versus N.M. Thomas in 1976 is one of the most important decisions in the constitutional history of reservation. This judgment brings out complete clarity about the philosophy of reservation. For the first time, the court held that Article 15(4) is not an exception but imparts substance to the concept of equality of opportunity as given in Article 15(1). Article 15(4) provides an affirmative support to Articles 15(1) and 15(2). It is not just an exception. The judgment in the state of Kerala versus V. N. M. Thomas was delivered by a bench of 7 judges which reviewed Articles 14, 15(4), 16(4), 46 and 353. In this landmark judgment, the bench held that the provisions of reservation is not just meant for representation but it also exists to eliminate inequalities. It further held that it is necessary to give preferential treatment to the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe community. The Supreme Court held that if equality of opportunity guaranteed under Article 16(1) means effective material equality, then Article 16(4) is not an exception to Article 16(1). It is only emphatic way of putting the extent to which equality of opportunity could be carried even up to the point of making reservations. In this case, for the first time, the Honourable Supreme Court also held that equality is not merely between individuals but also between different groups in the society. In a society where an individual is discriminated against only because he belongs to a particular community or a group, then along with equality between individuals, equality among different groups is also necessary. This is especially true for the communities that were denied access to education, property and power for centuries on account of social and economic structure. Such oppressed and excluded groups deserve special provisions so as to bring them at par with others. To bring more clarity on judgment, Honorable Justice Matthew observed that if we want to give equality of opportunity for employment to the members of SC/ST community, we will have to take the note of their social, educational and economic environment. Not only is the directive principles embodied in Article 46 binding on the lawmakers as ordinarily understood, but it should equally inform and illuminate the approach of the court. Justice Matthew quoted pertinent example given by political philosopher Bernard Williams. In a society, the most important task was that of a warrior who earned prestige, respect and power through his physical prowess. The only people who could become warriors were rich and privileged. In such a society which believed in slavery, a slave could never become a warrior. Over a period of time, this particular society faced reformative agitations that abolished slavery, and now the race to become a warrior was open to all, without exception. The competition was open to all with full equality. However, during the period of slavery, the slaves were rendered poor, weak, and malnourished in a deliberate manner that made them physically very weak. They could never qualify in such a supposedly neutral and equal competition. The competition was open in an equal manner for all, but in reality, it wasn't equal because there was no equality of opportunity, essentially because their circumstances were not equal. Here, Williams argues that such supposedly equal competitions was not at all equal in the true sense. Furthermore, it fails to fulfill the spirit of equality and ensure equity. According to Justice Matthew, to transform formal equality into equality of results or substantive equality, the Constitution has provided for Article 15(4) and 16(4). Justice Krishna Iyer has said that while interpreting the Article 16(1) and Article 16(2), which relate to promoting the interest of weaker sections of society, Article 46 has to be given emphatic expression. A dissenting judgment by Justice Subba Rao in Devdasan case is also important. He observed, if Article 16(1) stood alone, all the backward communities would go to the wall in a society of uneven basic social structure. The said rule of equality would remain only an utopian conception unless a practical content was given to it. To clarify this further, he gave an appropriate example also earlier given by Shahu Maharaj of a race between racehorse and ordinary horse, noting that if they both started together, it would only be a farce of competition. In other words, a racehorse was not a racehorse by nature, but as a result of many generations of conscious breeding and lifetime of painstaking care, advantages not available to ordinary horse. Nothing was changed, but because of rest of the people were so undernourished, because of which they could not pass test of physical capability. But this is obvious. Those who are poor are weak also. This is exactly why the framers of the Constitution inserted clause 4 to the Article 16. There are two aims of equality as enshrined in the preamble of the Constitution: equality of status and opportunity. There is yet another issue that is closely linked with the principle of equality of opportunity, and that is quantum of reservation. What should be the cap on the reservation? Up to what percentage should reservation be enacted? Recently, we have witnessed quite a few big agitations for inclusion of certain castes like Marathas, Jats, Gujars, Patels in the reservation quota, which are dominant caste in the society. It is natural that with such demands, people become scornful about the limit to which reservation should reasonably be extended, or suspect that governments have been granting reservations for political reasons. Let us review some historical facts. At the time of commencement of the Constitution, the state of Mysore provided reservation up to 68%. In the Balaji case, the Honourable Supreme Court struck this down, terming such a provision as constitutionally invalid. In the Indra Sani case related to the Mandal Commission recommendations, 50% was fixed as a upper limit. However, in Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, in educational institutions, reservation levels of 69% and 67% respectively continued, because the parliament put them in the 9th schedule of the Constitution beyond the reach of the courts. Now let us see Dr. Ambedkar's views on this issue, on the issue of quantum of reservation. On 30th November 1948, in the Constituent Assembly, Dr. Ambedkar talked about reconciliation of three principles as the best formula for reservation. These three principles are: first, equality of opportunity. Equality of it is a generic principle. The dominance of certain communities in the administration should disappear, and unrepresented castes should get an opportunity to get into public services. Third, the general category should have equality of opportunity in public employment. Elaborating further on the quantum of reservation, Dr. Ambedkar provided an example. He said that if 70% of the government posts are reserved and 30% are left unreserved, then according to him, this is against the general principle of equality of opportunity with respect to the general category. Such situation will completely destroy the ideal of equality as per the first principle. He said that the only consistent way in which the principle of equality of opportunity is upheld is when the reservation is limited to a minority seats. In other words, this means that reservation should be less than 50%. Though Dr. Ambedkar never fixed any quantum of reservation, he left it to the state to decide the level of adequate representation based on the percentage of population. In Balaji case, the Honourable Supreme Court capped the reservation at 50%, and in Indra Sani case, Supreme Court sealed this. In his work Quest for Equality, Indian Constitution since independence, Boja Tharakam has written that the Constitution speaks about adequacy in Article 16.4 and advancement in Article 15.4 of the backward classes of citizens. The quantum of reservation should be decided keeping both these principles in mind. He further says that it is for the state to decide what is the level of the advancement and adequacy. It may vary from state to state and situation to situation. For example, the state of Tamil Nadu The percentage of population of SC, ST, OBC together is 87%. For this 87% people, the quantum of reservation derived by the state is 69%. For the progress of these communities, what should be the limit of these special provisions? This will depend on the limit to which their advancement is required. If the gap is huge, then advancement required is higher, and thus the quantum of provisions required is larger. If the gap is less, the provisions can be reduced. The quantum should be in accordance with need, time, and circumstances. In another landmark judgment, in case of State of Punjab versus Hiralal in 1970, dealing with quantum of reservation, the Supreme Court held the mere fact that the reservation may give extensive benefit to some of the persons who already have benefited from reservation does not itself make reservation bad. The length of leave to be provided depends upon the gap to be covered. SC further said that if the gap is 68 feet, take a leap of 68 feet. There cannot be a fixed and rigid limit in matters of admission to educational institutions and appointments in the service of state, particularly when they have been denied opportunities for centuries. The Honourable Supreme Court has gone to the extent of saying that the scheme can be stopped only when the representation of these communities has attained the minimum levels. This is not merely question of representation. It pertains to participation as well. This country shall not be in any danger in case a slightly larger number of those communities come into the administration. On 25th November 1949, in his most important and famous last speech to the Constituent Assembly, Dr. Ambedkar said, on 26 January 1950, we are going to enter into a life of contradictions. In politics, we will have equality, and in social and economic life, we will have inequality. In politics, we will recognizing the principle of one man, one vote, one value. In our social and economic life, we shall, by reason of our social and economic structure, continue to deny the principle of one man, one value. We must make our political democracy a social democracy as well. Political democracy cannot last unless there lies at the base of it a social democracy. We must begin by acknowledging the fact that there is a complete absence of two things in the Indian society. One of these is equality. On the social plane, we have in India a society based on the principle of graded inequality, which we have a society in which there are some who have immense wealth as against many who live in abject poverty. How long shall we continue to live this life of contradictions? How long shall we continue to deny equality in our social and economic life? Jai Bhim.